almost everybody out in the first 24 hours.
I thought so too.
I believe it was all of the people who were injured and a majority of the casualties, but I have a feeling the people that were in the very first car were the hardest to get out because of the way it compressed and bent.
Yeah, well, it took them 4 days to get the last body out.
The last body that they get out is the driver of the train, the motorman, as they're referred to, and this driver, his name was Leslie Newson, he was a 56-year-old guy. He'd been working for the Tube for about 6 years at that point. 6 or 7 years, though for the first, until the last year of his life, he'd been working as a guard. Because you got to remember, somebody's got to walk through and help with the doors and keep an eye on the passengers so no bad stuff happens, and that's what the guard is for, and that's what he did.
But we do presume that the guard is at least, peripherally trained in the operation of
that is not the case.
No,
not even at all?
From what I have read, guards are supposed to be trained in how the trains function.
Really?
That is what I've read.
Well, I understood that they were trained in the basic functions, but they had to actually go through training to drive a train. They may be able to operate the
That's why I
handles,
said peripherally educated.
But they understand things like especially how the brake systems work and all that.
You would need to know how, like, the
they
emergency...
understand all that stuff.
Okay, I guess I was taking that into the larger context of all of the... I got you.
Vaguely understand how the thing works.
Yes.
So that if an emergency happened, they could take over.
Right, pull the brake handle.
Yeah.
And actually, I got to tell you, I have seen video of people driving the trains, and actually, I think I could do it.
It's not a complex machine to operate.
I
will say that.
I'm sure it's harder than it looks.
I was about to say, I don't believe it's an easy machine to operate, but I don't believe it's complex in the control.
I know that right now there's some tube operator that's listening to this, and he's fuming. And I just want to say, dude, I realize your job is harder than it looks. But send us an email anyway, by all means. Oh, where were we?
Well, what we were going to say is we were going to talk about Leslie Newson.
Did he go by Les?
I don't know that, to be honest.
I thought I've seen it online, people calling him Les.
Well, I was just going to use his last name to be safe.
Great, let's just go with his last name.
So, by all accounts, Newsom was a good driver, and he took his job seriously. Like I said, he'd only been driving trains for the past year. And he according to his wife and children, he wasn't a drinker. And when he had a drink, which was very rare, it was only on holidays, and he might have 1 or 2 brown ales. He only called out of work for a total of 2 days in the 6 or 7 years he worked for the Tube. So that's a good record. And his coworkers said that he didn't really have many friends, but generally he was a very cautious driver. He was known to the typical process, and this is a very general statement, so please understand that, was there was a point where you should start to begin braking to get to a minimum speed and then stop at the platform. He was known for just shutting off the engines before that minimum distance and letting the train coast almost entirely in, so he barely had to use the brakes at all. So he
seems like a nice smooth ride in.
Yes, which I've been on some trains that weren't so smooth, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, me too.
And that might have been him. I mean, we'll talk about this a little later, but there were also maintenance issues on the train. He might have been one of these guys that didn't want to put any stress on his brakes because he thought, well, I might need those someday.
And that is something. He was known for keeping a logbook of maintenance issues, and so that is one thing that was found in his belongings.
And some of the Tube trains had some maintenance issues.
So, overall, though, the description that we just gave of Newson does not jive with what the official investigation found and decided. Because they say that the entire incident was due to operator error. When you look at you guys looked through the accident report.
Yeah.
It's quite long, although the map at the end was really, really useful.
Was cool.
Yeah.
But according to the witnesses who were at the station, Newson was standing up and staring straight ahead as the train passed through the station with his hand in the full throttle position.
Are you going to, at some point, I presume, we'll talk about how these trains are operated?
Probably
like how somebody could say it was in the full throttle or not?
Yeah, probably in much more detail than some people really want.
Great.
Because that's the way I am with these mechanical bits and pieces.
That's true.
They're fun.
Okay, but we'll pause on that until you get there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we'll hold off. This is still kind of the general stuff.
Okay.
Like I said, the witnesses said that they saw him going through the station with his hands in the full throttle position. According to the official investigation, they felt like this witness statement was true because they say that when his body was removed from the train, it appeared that his hands prior to the impact must have been in that position. And they also x-rayed his arms and his hands because according to the official investigation, what they expected to see was that his bones would have been broken in a recognizable manner of a person realizing they're going to run into something, doing that defensive gesture where you cross your arms and put them in front of your head. We've all seen this on TV and movies. That's what they expected, and because the breaks in his arms and hands weren't consistent with that position, they said, yeah, no, his hands must have been on the controls. They can't say where the controls were, but they say his hands had to have been on the actual controls.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. But
well, even if they were, they can't say, oh, he was frantically trying to brake or he was accelerating full throttle. All they can say is they were probably in the same area where the controls were.
Yep, that's absolutely right. And to be honest, so the statement of his hands, where his hands were, is a bit dodgy to me because drivers typically would operate the train, most of them would operate the train without the cab light on, so it didn't create glare and stuff like that, so they could see ahead. Well, when coming into the station, the Inquest did a bunch of tests, and they had drivers with light on and the light off. With the light off, you can see the general silhouette of the person, but you can't actually discern what position their hands are in. In other words, full power, off, pulling the brake, not pulling the brake. You can just kind of generally see their silhouette.
I know. I wouldn't see it because I'd be running away.
Well, witness reports are often like really hot. Like having in the not too long ago future tried to give a witness testimony as, whatever, from something that I thought I saw very clearly, and then realizing I actually have no idea if what I'm saying is accurate or not. And
that is the reason why I am inclined to disregard the statement of the witness named I.A. Butt. And I kid you not, that is his name.
Are you sure it's Butt and not Boot?
Yes. I'm pretty sure it's pronounced in this country, Butt.
An unfortunate name.
So this was a horrible, horrible incident. I mean, like we said, a lot of people lost their lives, a lot of injuries, but the good things that came out of it were two. The first of which is that the speed limits for trains that were coming to the end, not the actual end of the line.
Yeah, dead ends.
Dead ends was reduced from 15 to 10 miles per hour to help ensure that somebody couldn't be asleep at the wheel and driving 15 and drive all the way through. The other thing that came through is that in 1978, the Moorgate protection system was introduced, which it was an automated system that if after a certain point a train wasn't below a certain speed, it automatically turned on the brakes. So truly automated I shouldn't say truly, but to a large extent automated the brakes so that if somebody's not paying attention and they're flying through there, the train is gonna stop. Because that's the problem with this incident, is that according to everybody, the train never hit its brakes. It just flew through full throttle.
Here's my favorite part about this. Wasn't it the train crash that happened in America like 2 years ago where suddenly they were like, oh, you know what we should have on our commuter rails?
Yeah, safety thing.
Safety thing.
Safety gear.
Yeah.
We should make some safety stuff, because that would be safe and stuff.
Yeah,
that would help,
30 years after.
If nothing else, maybe like a big guy to stand behind the driver and sort of step in when things go south.
And say, excuse me.
Not excuse me, just knock him out of the way and grab the controls.
I know we're close to theories here, but just quickly.
They stand, I think.
They stand. In the 1938 stock, I understood that they stood. I did not ever see a seat in any of the photos of the driver's section of the train, which suddenly the name is escaped me.
Cab.
Cab, thank you. I'll work with that.
Yeah.
So yes, there is not a seat that I'm aware of.
Just wanted to clarify.
Okay. Any other questions before we...
Nope.
Well, before we get into theories, let's take a really quick break.
Hi there. Joe here from Thinking Sideways, the podcast. Well, it finally happened. There's another podcast out there. So finally somebody caught on to our great idea, and they're doing it too. And so if you do have room in your life for a second podcast, you might want to give this one a look, or I guess a listen. It's called First Day Back, and it's kind of intriguing sounding. The concept is, how does a person return from an event that changes them? The new story for this new season, apparently this is the second season. It's about a woman who's just getting out of prison. She was in prison because she accidentally shot and killed her husband. And here's the kicker, she has no memory of it. The show explains what happened that night, and also just everything that comes after, like what's it like on your first day out of prison, how do you readjust, how do you find a job, can you reconnect with your family? And all that's the easy part, of course. The hard part is figuring out how to live with the guilt of what she did and try to find some forgiveness for herself. So that's what it's about. Bottom line is, how do you come back from the worst thing you've ever done, especially when you don't even remember doing it? The show is called First Day Back. It's on Stitcher and, wherever else you listen to podcasts.
Okay, and we're back, and I'm a little upset with you, Joe.
Yeah?
Because where's my sandwich?
Oh, you know.
I've had that thing in the fridge for a while now, and I've slowly been working my way through it. I want to know where my foot-long sandwich is at.
Well, here's all you got to do is follow your nose.
Okay, well, let's get on to theories. Theory number one, which shouldn't be any surprise to anybody because this is always there in an accident situation.
He left to start a new life. He faked his own death.
No, actually, that's not it.
Not there?
Wrong kind of mystery.
Oh, okay.
Wrong kind of mystery. No, he was drunk. Because drunk is always it. People say, well, he had to have been drunk to have driven the train into the end of the tunnel and not applied the brakes. And one of the things that is always referred to, and you see this in the official inquest, is that when they tested his blood, they found that he had 80 milligrams per 100 milliliters of alcohol in his blood, which, by my math, comes out to 0.08 BAC, meaning legally drunk in this country, in the U.S.
At least in our state.
In our state,
Lower
yes.
and higher in different places.
Correct.
I thought it was more like 0.04, but I could be wrong about that.
Well, and there's some things to take into consideration here. The first of which is that the doctor, and it's referred to strangely in a lot of the reporting, but the doctor who took the samples and wrote the report said that she took samples from 8 other bodies that were in the same conditions as Newson's, and that his blood alcohol content was double any of the other bodies. And I'm assuming they were bodies from that actual accident scene. You know, we've talked about this before, but we'll do it again, is that the human body, when it expires, is capable of creating alcohol, or I should probably correct that, it's the bacteria that are feeding upon the human body that make alcohol as a byproduct. Mm-hmm. And the warmer it is, the faster they work and the faster they grow and eat, and therefore poop out alcohol.
Yeah. Not alcohol you want to drink,
No. But think about the conditions we described, which is a tunnel that is between 90 to 120 degrees.
It got friggin' hot.
Yeah.
It did. It get really hot in there. So depending on, there's some things that we don't get the answers to, which is, we know that his body was in there for 4 days, but we don't know how long the other bodies that were sampled were actually in the tunnel before they were moved, and I'm presuming sent to a morgue where they were then put into a cooler, which would have stopped the little bacteria from continuing to generate alcohol.
Yeah.
You would think. He was definitely the last out.
Yeah.
As the old saying goes, first in, last out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is the old saying. So let's run with the theory, though.
Yeah, there are other issues here, though. I mean,
There are. So if we run with the theory and we think about this, let's think about, well, when could he have had his drinks? When he could have been drinking?
Yeah.
Well, there's before or on the job. Those are the two simple answers there.
Yep.
If we think about on the job, the morning of the accident, sometime between 6:10 and 6:24, which was the start of his shift, 6:24, Newson had tea with some of the other drivers, and one of whom asked if he could borrow some milk. and he allowed him to, and that driver said the milk didn't taste of alcohol. So obviously he wasn't spiking his tea as he was driving through the day. That to me means that he must have consumed it probably before he would have gotten to work, because drinking on the job is really obvious because it's a semi-open cab situation.
I'll take a little issue with that and say that, to-go cups are a thing. He could have, been having a bunch of alcohol in like a styrofoam...
A flask?
No, like a styrofoam cup that looks like coffee or something like that. Those were very popular in those days.
It is, but the thing is that
I can't imagine
nobody that he interacted with said that he A, smelled of booze, or B, acted weird. So it seems a little weird that he would have done it beforehand.
No, I'm saying I'm taking issue with drinking on the job.
But the other thing I was going to say is that the guard on the train interacted with Newson through the 2 hours or hour prior to the accident and never saw anything. And it's not like the driver can hold his cup while he's driving the train.
That's true.
Kind of needs both hands.
I didn't see a cup holder.
Mostly just playing devil's advocate.
I know.
But I will also mention that maybe the testimony of that guard is not the most sound testimony.
He was an 18-year-old kid, and he wasn't really paying attention. He's actually quite scolded in the report for lack of diligence in his duty.
Yeah.
Well, and he should have been like mostly at the back of the train anyway, so there would have been plenty of time he wouldn't have been around the driver.
But I also agree he probably wasn't drinking before. I mean, the coworkers, if they went so far to say, well, the milk wasn't alcohol, they probably would have gone so far to also say, also he wasn't drunk when we were hanging out with him.
Right.
At least not drunk enough to crash a train.
He should have been at 6 in the morning to have been that unaware. He would have had to been super stumbly, belligerently drunk, and he did not appear to be that way. Though his family, they did have booze in the house. There was a reporter that went over, and he was like, well, where did you keep the drink cabinet? And they looked, and sure enough, there's Bacardi, because everybody says, well, he must have been drinking something that didn't have a smell. And I gotta tell you that only vodka drinkers and sometimes gin drinkers are the ones who believe that you can't smell that stuff.
Well, yeah, and they're wrong.
They're wrong. Everybody else can smell that stuff, so...
And also, adults have Bacardi in the house. Like, calm down.
Yeah, I know. Well, I saw that report, and it was like she admitted that it might be down a little bit in level.
But she didn't know.
She didn't know, and the thing about it is this was like how many months or years after the wreck?
6 or 9 months after the fact.
Yeah. So, I mean, I got to tell you, it would have been in my house, it would have been like not down a little bit.
Yeah.
It would have been gone, replaced by
I was going to say, I'm going to
know.
be in big trouble if I ever, get in a crash and they're like, well, let's go see your alcohol cabinet.
And all the bottles have
Do you have alcohol in your house? Oh, well, you must have been drunk. I'm out of luck at that point. If that's how we're doing this now.
Now, to give a little bit of credence to the he should have been drunk, or he was drunk theory, if indeed his BAC was double the other people on the train, let's just say the bacteria created 0.04 blood alcohol content, that means that he had to have, at the time of the accident, had 0.04 already in his system. So he may not have truly been belligerently blasted drunk, but still, 0.04, that's noticeable.
Pretty drunk.
And it should have been smells, behavioral issues, and none of that really comes up. So,
also, did he... so he did an entire run of a train. He'd been doing runs all morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was he having a hard time hitting the stops at all the other places? I mean, it's not as though, especially in the less than 10 minutes it takes to do the run, we're not saying it was weird because he was lurching into every single stop. He was missing these stops. Those were pretty hard stops to hit as well, and he made those all fine. So what happened in the 2 minutes between the last stop and the final stop? I mean,
you down to fifth of rum? I don't know.
But it had to have been. But it had to have been at the beginning of the. I mean,
well, I tell you, I've been over the legal limit. At least I think so. I've never actually blown a breathalyzer before, but I'm sure I've been over the legal limit.
I'm pretty sure you have too.
And I have never crashed a train.
Yeah.
or a car for that
So
matter.
anecdotally, we're proving this theory bad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, this is a poor theory, and it was dismissed by the official inquiry, though there are people who still feel that it's correct. But we'll leave that theory behind and we'll move to the next one.
I hate this one.
I know you do, and I'm not very keen on it, though it's rather popular, which is that Newson decided to commit suicide and just happened to take 43 other poor souls along with him.
Well, there were
he decided to it was death by train. He decided that was his method to go.
There are a lot of issues with this.
There are. The first of which is that people say, well, he obviously knew what he was doing, and he did it intentionally. And that's why he was seen standing upright in the cab when he came through the station. And they say, the fact that he didn't cover his head with his arms shows that he was also doing it willfully, and it wasn't. It wasn't if it was oh crap moment. He's like, I'm doing. He was just hanging on. Again, doing it intentionally. But as with all suicide theories, this doesn't mate up with anybody who knows him, because as we've seen this in a lot of stories, his family, his co-workers, they all say that he didn't have any signs of depression. He didn't show any signs of being suicidal. Nothing like that was present, though. We have talked about the fact that there can be that spur of the moment, hidden feelings people don't want to admit or don't see. But the thing that I have a problem with the whole suicide theory is that the day before, Newson had sent his wife to the bank to get £300 so that he could then go buy a car for his daughter, and he had that money on him, which to me indicates he's planning to go from work to buy the car, to take the car home, which in my estimation would not be the actions of a man who was planning to take his own life.
Actually, it occurs to me he has a daughter who was of the age that he was buying a car for, so that could account for why the liquor was maybe a little lower
That's true.
than originally anticipated.
Yeah.
I mean, there were teenage kids in the house. But no, I mean, I agree. It's that same thing. What was the case we talked about recently with the guy who apparently stabbed himself 3 times as suicide?
Oog
yeah.
de la Plaza.
Yeah, I mean, we had that issue where he apparently made himself a meal and then stabbed himself 3 times.
So again, it's like, wait, that there's a level of drunk and intentional that...
I don't think so.
No, so I will agree. I don't know about you, Joe, but I personally am willing very easily to discount suicide.
I don't really buy it either. I could picture murder. Actually, the one thing that sort of turns movies or TV or whatever, where there's a guy and for some reason, because some international cabal of bioterrorists have got the goods on him, and they're holding his family hostage.
And if he doesn't crash the train,
he has to crash the train,
or they'll kill his family or something.
And so I sort of went with that theory just for fun, of course, we've seen it in the movies, right? Yeah.
Well, if it happens in the movies, it happens in real life. Funsies is realsies.
Yeah. So there's that.
No.
I mean, so that would be suicide, but not really voluntary.
Yeah,
suicide.
Involuntary. So technically murder.
Yeah, but I don't see any real evidence of that. But it's a nice one, juicy. I mean, yeah.
Yours, not the real theory.
No.
So let's go to our next theory, which is
one.
He had a medical condition which was the cause of the entire accident.
Yeah, more possible.
The Inquisition, they looked into a lot of things to try and figure out if indeed something had happened. They checked his heart to see if maybe he had suffered a heart attack. They did tests, which I'm not exactly clear on, but they were trying to figure out if he had had a seizure of some kind that would have locked up his muscles so that he couldn't release the controls of the train.
Those are hard to...
Nothing was found from it.
Well, yeah, especially because, I presume that his body took a fair amount of damage in the crash. So it would be pretty hard to...
Massive trauma to the head.
Yeah.
Massive trauma.
It would be really hard to kind of diagnose any of those things after the fact.
You would think so, huh?
Yeah.
I think that just about everything would have been kind of exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They did examine his body to see if he had been electrocuted, because the trains, they're electric trains, and there was the possibility that a current could have, for some reason, gone through the metal controls that he was holding, would have gone through his body and then through his feet back into the metal decking. That would have been the current.
That would account for him standing in the same spot and keeping his grip.
Yeah,
on
because
the
he's
controls.
being shocked, and therefore all of his muscles are contracted, and he cannot physically let go.
That probably would have left some marks, though.
There were none.
Yeah.
So definitely couldn't have been that. So I don't believe that was it.
I have a couple medical theories.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. One thing is, 53 is not that old, but early signs of dementia can account for kind of blackout locked-in syndrome.
I kind of looked into that, and it seems like there should have been a lot more symptoms.
Well, it's hard. Early signs of dementia particularly are really hard because they're things like you are a little more forgetful than you usually are, or you have blackouts, or, blah, blah, blah. And these are all things that you have to self-report, and especially, British stiff upper lip. At 56, it's likely if it was just starting to happen that he would have not even mentioned it, or even his wife would have said, it's funny, you keep leaving your keys all around, and you keep asking me where they are, and they're sitting right there. What's going on? Oh, it's, just getting older. It's normal aging. And I mean, that's one thing that could account for it, because you can suffer these like really just blackouts, basically where your brain just stops functioning, but your body's still functioning.
My one problem with that.
Oh, you only have one.
Well, it's a very popular reason today. It's the darling diagnosis. It's the
Dementia?
diagnosis
for this thing. You mean?
Well, no, just for things today. In our current, I'd say last decade, it's like, oh well, I bet you it was early onset dementia.
I disagree.
Or it was dementia. I feel like I see that a lot in stories more than I used to.
I think they're just getting better at diagnosing it. Because I mean, again, it's one of those things where 50 years ago, people were like, I don't know, he's forgetful.
Well, there are things that do tend to get kind of overdiagnosed.
Oh,
like
for sure.
ADHD, for example.
Oh, absolutely. But, I mean, that would have been one. And then he also could have, had that. He could have just had a little bit of a seizure or a stroke or something like that.
Yeah, and
that would be really hard.
That would be hard, especially for the kind of damage that his body took to figure out post-mortem.
Yeah.
It would be. It was suggested that this kind of, I know, dovetails into the dementia, is that it was suggested that maybe he was just kind of daydreaming and not paying attention.
Kind of got hypnotized by the rails and the lights.
Kind of got hypnotized, and that's what caused it. Except one thing to keep in mind is that it's two sets of rails that go north-south. So one is the south line, one is the north line, and they cross each other just before the platform, and where that X happens, there is a notable jump or jolt to the train. It's a bump. So that and the noise of the platform, everybody says, should have been enough that if the motorman was literally just gathering wool, he should have come to his senses quite quickly based on that alone, and that should have jolted him to
I guess this
start
is
braking.
this. I'm just doing the devil's advocate thing for this one. But haven't you ever had those times where you're kind of staring off into space, and somebody says something, and you kind of come back, but you keep staring off into space? Do you ever have that?
No.
Oh, I get that a lot. Where like it actually sometimes I get into physical pain if I like snap out of it too fast. Just stare off into space and somebody says something and I'm like, oh, here I am, but I have to keep staring off, or else, okay, now I can come back. I don't know.
You come back in phases, not all at once.
Mm-hmm. But one would present that he could have come back in a couple stages and still made it.
I think, that just doesn't really seem to happen to that many people, because if it did, we have a lot more dead pedestrians and things like that,
So what you're saying is I'm weird.
No.
I'm saying that you are probably not the
pedestrians.
norm in that.
Yeah. The good news is I don't do it when I'm driving. So.
Well, thank goodness.
That is good.
Now, there were the other thing that, and again, this is the things that were really hard to diagnose properly, is there were suggestions that he'd suffered what were some pretty rare or exotic conditions that are acute. They just happen that one or two times. That would be akin to, like, as you said, the locked-in scenario. Locked in his brain but not able to move. But those are things that are just so difficult to diagose.
Yeah, I mean,
they were just disregarded by the investigating committee. Yeah,
and again, I mean, blackouts can be just a one-off, couple-off time thing. They don't even have to be associated with anything. Your brain can just be like, bye for a little bit. And usually those do coincide with you collapse or blah, blah, blah. But it is possible to have your brain go and not your body.
Yeah.
At least for a couple minutes.
Seems rather unlikely, though.
We're going to move on to the next theory. The next theory is mechanical failure, and it's got a couple of subsections to it, so there's actually some explanation that I need to do.
I was going to say, you need to tell us about the mechanics first.
I do. So first off, I talked about this earlier, is that the train that was involved, it was a 1938 tube stock, and again, that is the stock of trains that is used in the tube. They had been in service at that time for over 40 years.
They had a lot of them, by the way.
They did. And, these trains, they apparently worked well because currently some of them, though they've been decommissioned in the tube, there's still some of them running on the Isle of Wight.
Yeah.
So those trains weren't all that bad.
Yeah. As long as they were maintained, I think that was one of the issues.
And we're going to get into that. But before we get into maintenance stuff, let's talk about the train operation, because that's going to really be paramount for the stuff that's coming up.
Uh-huh.
Before I get into the train operation, I have to say thank you to both Alistair and Anthony. Thank you so much to those guys for helping me understand the nuts and bolts of how the cab worked.
Aha!
Because that really, really made a big difference for me. So here's how the train works. The driver stands in the cab and has their left hand and their right hand on top of, for lack of a better term, two columns, a left hand and a right hand column. The left hand column has a control on it that swings back and forth, and that is the application of the brakes. It's the brake handle. So the right hand column had the speed control for the train, which was a lever system. So think about if there's a clock laying in a plane in front of you. The lever is off when it's at the 3 o'clock position, and then the driver would pull it and it would rotate to the 6 o'clock position.
And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd heard or read that you have to push down on it.
I'm not there yet.
Rotate it? Oh,
I'm not there yet. That's the dead man switch part. I'm not there yet.
Oh, okay.
So we're taking this in pieces.
All right.
So you would move it from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock to put the train into forward go, to get power. And the easy way there's this whole serial and parallel thing, which we'll talk about later, but think of it as low and a high gear. Low gear is at 6 o'clock, and then when the train had enough speed, you would continue to push it to the left in an arc to the 9 o'clock position, and that's where it's high gear. That's the basics of the control of the operation. What you were talking about, Joe, is the dead man switch component of the control. Mm-hmm. And that is when it's in the 3 o'clock position, in order to move that lever, the operator of the train has to push it down, and it took 15 pounds of force to get it down enough before it would begin to rotate. And then from there on, they had to keep 3 pounds of pressure on it. But it is a dead man switch. And everybody, you know what a dead man switch is, whether you realize it or not, because we're going to go back to the movies. There's that scene in the movies where the bad guy's got a bomb and he's holding a switch in his hand. If the good guys shoot him and he dies, he'll let go and the bomb will go off, and drama ensues. But basically it is, if somebody lets go of the switch and it turns off, something is going to happen. Basic, simple, driver moves it to 6 o'clock and doesn't keep pressure on it and lets go for some reason, the brakes on the train, the dead man function, would activate the brakes and stop the train. So that, let's say somebody sneaks up and clubs our driver in the back of the head and he lets go of the controls, the train is going to automatically stop.
And you said how much weight does it take? How much pressure does it take?
3 pounds of pressure to keep it down, 15 pounds to initially push it down. So it takes a bit of force to push it down, and then to maintain it, it's a noticeable force, because there is spring or air pressure trying to push it up. It's resisting the downward force that your hand is keeping on it.
Okay.
Basics, overview, very basic, of how the controls work.
I wonder how many tube drivers have had made themselves a specially weighted glove to make it easier. I've heard it's hard to do that all day, press down on
I don't think they actually made a specially weighted glove, but as we'll talk about later on, they did figure out some tricks to make it much easier on themselves.
I was going to say, really all you have to do is lean on it.
That would be